Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of the Cocaine Cowboys, Miami's drug war. A tale of greed, power, and calculated violence. This case will leave you wondering, how far will someone go to control a city's underworld? And how could the very people meant to protect the innocent become part of the game? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of the Cocaine Cowboys, Miami's drug war. It was a sweltering summer evening in Miami, 1981, when a routine traffic stop spiraled into chaos. What started as a mundane patrol turned into a gunfight that left 2 officers dead and revealed a trunk filled with $5 million in cocaine. This seemingly isolated incident would unmask a web of corruption, betrayal, and brutality that gripped Miami during its bloodiest years of war that turned the Magic City into a battleground. Miami in the late 1970s was a city of contradictions. Its pristine beaches and vibrant nightlife attracted tourists from across the globe, but just beyond the glittering facade lay a dark undercurrent. The city had become the epicenter of a booming drug trade, with cocaine pouring in from Colombia at an unprecedented rate. By the time the white powder hit the streets, fortunes had already exchanged hands, leaving violence and corruption in their wake. At the heart of this illicit empire was a man known only as El Tigre. His name carried both fear and respect among those who operated in Miami's shadow. Few had ever seen him, but his influence was undeniable. From the jungles of Colombia to the shores of Florida, El Tigre orchestrated an operation that moved thousands of kilos of cocaine each month. His network stretched across international borders, and his power was enforced by a fearsome group of enforcers who earned their chilling moniker, the Cowboys. The Cowboys were unlike anything Miami had seen before. They weren't just drug runners, they were soldiers, brutal and unrelenting. With their fast cars, high-powered weapons, and no-holds-barred approach to business, they became infamous for their willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Witnesses to their crimes either vanished or remained silent, and police investigations had dead ends as fear paralyzed the community. 2 individuals stood out among the Cowboys' ranks: Carlos the Wolf Alvarez and Victoria Cruz. Carlos was a former Marine who had found himself adrift after his military service. His sharp tactical mind and expertise in logistics made him indispensable to the operation. He handled shipments, coordinated security, and ensured that every delivery went off without a hitch. To outsiders, Carlos was a cold and efficient operator, but within the organization, his loyalty to El Tigre bordered on fanaticism. Victoria Cruz, on the other hand, played a different but equally vital role. With a degree in accounting and an innate understanding of financial systems, she transformed the Cowboys' books into an impenetrable maze. She was the architect behind the laundering of millions of dollars, using shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate-looking businesses to keep the money flowing. Victoria was as sharp as she was discreet, moving seamlessly between the criminal underworld and Miami's high society. Together, Carlos and Victoria formed a deadly duo, and their contributions to the Cowboys' success did not go unnoticed. The organization grew bolder, expanding its reach and cementing its dominance. Cocaine was no longer just a drug, it was a currency, a symbol of power that could buy loyalty, silence, and even legitimacy. But with expansion came new challenges. As El Tigre and the Cowboys solidified their empire, they attracted attention from more than just rivals. Law enforcement agencies, including the DEA and local police, began to take notice of the rising tide of violence and drugs. Shootouts in broad daylight, bodies dumped in canals, and mysterious explosions became almost commonplace, painting a grim portrait of a city under siege. Investigators knew the crimes were linked, but they struggled to piece together the puzzle. What they didn't realize was how deeply rooted the problem had become. El Tigre wasn't just running a drug empire, he was corrupting the very institutions meant to stop him. Bribes flowed freely to customs officials, police officers, and even judges. Cases were dismissed, evidence vanished, and witnesses were too afraid to testify. Miami wasn't just a battleground, it was a city where the rules no longer applied. Despite the mounting pressure, El Tigre remained elusive. His true identity was a mystery, and even his most trusted lieutenants operated on a need-to-know basis. Carlos and Victoria knew only fragments of the larger picture, focusing instead on their individual roles within the organization. They thrived in the chaos, confident in the invincibility of the Cowboys. But even empires have weaknesses, and cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Rival cartels, jealous of the Cowboys' dominance, started testing their strength. Shootings and bombings became more frequent, and every death sent ripples of paranoia through the ranks. Trust, once a cornerstone of the operation, began to erode as whispers of betrayal spread like wildfire. In the midst of this growing tension, Victoria Cruz began to notice something troubling. The books weren't adding up. Shipments were being lost, and large sums of money were disappearing without explanation. She suspected internal theft but lacked the evidence to confront anyone. Quietly, she began keeping her own records, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Carlos Alvarez faced a different challenge. As the Cowboys' enforcer, he was tasked with maintaining order, both within the organization and on the streets. The escalating violence put him on edge, and his once unshakable confidence in El Tigre's leadership began to waver. He knew that chaos bred opportunity, and the slightest misstep could lead to disaster. Miami's underworld was a ticking time bomb, and the players involved were inching closer to their breaking points. For now, El Tigre remained in control, but the storm brewing around him was impossible to ignore. As the summer of 1981 approached, the city braced itself for a reckoning. The Cocaine Cowboys had risen to power with ruthless efficiency, but their reign was far from secure. Detective James "Jimmy" Monroe was the kind of officer who commanded respect in the Miami Police Department. Known for his sharp instincts and a spotless record, he was a rising star in law enforcement. However, behind the facade of a dedicated public servant lay a man whose appetite for risk and wealth made him vulnerable. When a chance encounter introduced him to an associate of the Cowboys, Monroe found himself lured into a world of easy money and dangerous secrets. It began innocuously, a small favor here, a piece of information there. At first, the cash payment seemed harmless, even justifiable. Monroe rationalized his actions, telling himself he wasn't hurting anyone. But as the envelopes of money grew thicker, so did his entanglement with the Cowboys. The group quickly realized they had found a valuable asset. Monroe provided critical intelligence, tipping off the gang about police operations, raids, and surveillance. His insider knowledge kept the authorities one step behind, allowing the Cowboys to operate with impunity. Monroe wasn't alone in his corruption. His partner, Officer Darren Bishop, soon joined him. Bishop, whose penchant for reckless behavior had earned him a reputation among his colleagues, saw Monroe's arrangement as an opportunity. Together, the two officers became the Cowboys' silent protectors within the police department. Their actions paved the way for larger shipments, more brazen operations, and escalating violence. Victoria Cruz played a pivotal role in managing the relationship between the Cowboys and their network of compromised officials. With her sharp mind and polished demeanor, she ensured the bribes were distributed discreetly, leaving no paper trail. She understood the importance of keeping these alliances intact and worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion of loyalty among their paid allies. Her strategy extended beyond law enforcement. Customs agents turned a blind eye to suspicious cargo, and city officials inexplicably delayed investigations. Even judges and prosecutors found themselves under the sway of the Cowboys, their impartiality compromised by threats or lucrative payouts. As Monroe and Bishop sank deeper into the underworld, the weight of their choices began to take a toll. Monroe, who had always prided himself on his discipline, found himself slipping. The money fueled his gambling habit, and his frequent trips to high-stakes poker games began raising eyebrows. Bishop, on the other hand, became increasingly erratic, flaunting his newfound wealth in ways that drew unwanted attention. Their actions began to strain the carefully constructed web of secrecy surrounding the Cowboys' operations. Meanwhile, the DEA was ramping up its efforts to dismantle Miami's burgeoning drug trade. The violence on the streets and the sheer volume of cocaine entering the city had reached critical levels, prompting federal agencies to intervene. Task forces were formed, and surveillance was intensified, but every lead seemed to evaporate. Agents grew frustrated, suspecting that someone within law enforcement was sabotaging their efforts. Victoria Cruz, ever the strategist, monitored these developments with a growing sense of unease. She knew that corruption, while useful, was also volatile. Monroe and Bishop had proven valuable, but their flaws made them a liability. Victoria began keeping tabs on their behavior, quietly preparing contingencies in case their actions threatened the organization. Monroe's downfall began with a single mistake. Desperate to cover a significant gambling debt, he took a larger-than-usual payment from the Cowboys and tried to hide it. This deviation from their established protocol did not go unnoticed. Bishop, already on edge from Monroe's increasingly reckless behavior, grew paranoid. The two men began to distrust each other, their partnership unraveling under the weight of suspicion. The DEA, meanwhile, was beginning to close in. Special Agent Sarah Collins, a relentless investigator known for her ability to connect disparate pieces of information, had been assigned to the case. Collins suspected that the leaks within the police department were a key reason behind the agency's repeated failures. She quietly began probing the department, cross-referencing personnel records, and identifying officers whose actions didn't align with standard procedures. Collins' investigation began to yield results. A series of unusual financial transactions linked Monroe to several known associates of the Cowboys. While the evidence was circumstantial, it was enough to justify further scrutiny. Monroe, sensing the pressure, grew increasingly desperate. He reached out to his contacts within the Cowboys, hoping for protection, but instead found himself being watched more closely than ever. Victoria Cruz, now fully aware of the growing risk Monroe posed, decided to act. She funneled additional funds to a few key officials, ensuring that any investigation into Monroe would hit roadblocks. But even her meticulous planning couldn't account for the volatility within the organization. The Cowboys were facing threats on multiple fronts: rival cartels, law enforcement, and now the potential exposure of their most critical assets. The tension reached its breaking point when a shipment of cocaine, meticulously planned and heavily guarded, was intercepted by customs agents acting on an anonymous tip. The loss was substantial, both financially and symbolically. It signaled that the Cowboys' operation was no longer untouchable. El Tigre, furious over the setback, demanded answers, and the organization's enforcers were tasked with rooting out potential traitors. Monroe, unaware that he was already under suspicion, tried to negotiate his way out of the chaos. His pleas fell on deaf ears. To the Cowboys, he was no longer an asset but a liability. Victoria Cruz, pragmatic as ever, recognized the need to cut ties. She orchestrated a plan to distance the organization from Monroe, ensuring that if he fell, he would fall alone. As the summer of 1981 loomed, Miami streets buzzed with anticipation. The pressure on the Cowboys was mounting, and the fragile alliances they had built were beginning to crumble. Corruption, once their greatest weapon, was now a double-edged sword. The men who had once provided them with cover were now their greatest vulnerabilities, and the cracks in the foundation of their empire were growing wider. By 1981, the DA's frustration with Miami's drug epidemic had reached a boiling point. Efforts to curtail the cocaine trade were met with resistance at every turn. Agents suspected that corruption had infiltrated local law enforcement, making their investigations nearly impossible. Cases stalled without explanation, evidence vanished, and key witnesses refused to testify. often disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The realization that their task required more drastic measures led to the assignment of Special Agent Sarah Collins. Known for her unrelenting pursuit of justice, Collins was tasked with infiltrating Miami's murky drug underworld and uncovering its darkest secrets. Collins immersed herself in Miami's vibrant and chaotic nightlife. She frequented clubs where rumors of drug deals were as common as the music pumping through the speakers. Her ability to blend in allowed her to gather valuable information. Over time, she identified a low-level dealer who, eager to impress her, let slip a few details about the Cowboys. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Collins a lead. Surveillance on the Cowboys began in earnest. Collins and her team documented every movement, following trucks from warehouses to shipping docks, tracking the flow of money and drugs. They pieced together fragments of a massive operation but lacked the proof needed to dismantle it. Collins suspected that the leaks within law enforcement were directly linked to the Cowboys' ability to evade capture. Every time the DEA made a move, the target seemed to vanish just in time. As her investigation deepened, Collins discovered the depth of Detective Monroe's involvement. Financial records linked him to suspicious transactions, and his presence near key locations coincided too often with compromised raids. Though the evidence against him was mounting, it wasn't enough to bring charges. Collins needed something definitive, a single mistake that could expose the rot within the system. The opportunity came when Monroe, desperate to clear his escalating gambling debts, agreed to broker a high-stakes deal. The buyer, a mysterious figure promising to purchase a massive shipment of cocaine, was in fact an undercover DEA agent. The plan was risky. The DEA needed the cooperation of several agencies, including Miami's police department, to ensure the sting operation was executed flawlessly. Tensions ran high as the day of the deal approached. The meeting was set to take place in a secluded warehouse, chosen for its distance from prying eyes. On the surface, everything seemed meticulously planned, but the threat of betrayal loomed. Collins knew that any slip could lead to disaster, not just for the operation but for her entire team. As the undercover agent arrived at the warehouse, the Cowboys were already on edge. They had been dealing with a string of losses, including a large shipment intercepted by customs. The pressure from their rivals, combined with mounting scrutiny from law enforcement, had made them paranoid. Carlos Alvarez oversaw the deal, ensuring every detail was accounted for. He trusted no one and demanded absolute control over the operation. The deal started as expected, with briefcases of cash exchanged for packages of cocaine. The undercover agent maintained his composure, playing his role convincingly. Then, chaos erupted. A rival cartel, tipped off about the deal, stormed the warehouse, guns blazing. What should have been a smooth operation devolved into a violent shootout. Bullets tore through the air as the Cowboys fought to protect their shipment. Amid the carnage, Detective Monroe was fatally wounded. Before succumbing to his injuries, he uttered a name that sent shockwaves through the DEA team monitoring the operation: Javier Morales. The name had surfaced before in whispers and rumors, but no one had connected it directly to the Cowboys. Morales, a respected Miami businessman, had maintained a spotless public image. To learn that he was, in fact, El Tigre was both a revelation and a confirmation of Collins' suspicions. The warehouse raid left a trail of destruction, but it also provided crucial evidence. Collins and her team recovered ledgers, phone records, and coded messages that linked Morales to the Cowboys. The fallout was immediate. Morales, now exposed, became the DEA's primary target. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, reeling from the botched deal and the loss of Monroe, found themselves vulnerable. Collins understood the significance of the moment. Morales had built his empire on fear and loyalty, but the chaos within the Cowboys suggested that cracks were forming. With Monroe dead and Bishop missing, the organization's grip on Miami began to loosen. Still, Morales was a cunning adversary. His wealth and connections provided him with the means to evade capture. The DEA intensified their efforts, knowing that Morales would do whatever it took to protect himself. Collins pushed her team harder, leveraging the information gathered from the raid to dismantle the Cowboys' network. Yet the closer they came to bringing Morales to justice, the more dangerous the mission became. Rivals, allies, and traitors all converged in a storm of violence and betrayal. As Miami descended further into chaos, Collins prepared for what she knew would be the fight of her career. Morales might have been unmasked, but bringing him down would require more than evidence. It would require navigating a treacherous web of lies, corruption, and greed, where even the smallest misstep could prove fatal. The game was far from over, and Collins was determined to see it through to the end. As the walls closed in on Javier Morales, the man behind the Cowboys, he began orchestrating a series of desperate moves to secure his empire. The DEA's discovery of his identity had shaken the foundation of his operation, but Morales was no ordinary criminal. Years of careful planning, bribery, and manipulation had fortified his position, allowing him to remain untouchable, even as chaos threatened to engulf him. Morales knew he couldn't rely solely on fear to maintain control. He needed to make calculated decisions to eliminate vulnerabilities and outmaneuver his enemies. The first step in Morales' plan was to contain the fallout from the disastrous warehouse raid. He called for an emergency meeting with his remaining inner circle, a select group of lieutenants who had proven their loyalty over the years. Among them was Victoria Cruz, the financial mastermind who had helped turn the Cowboys into a global operation. Morales tasked her with an impossible mission to erase all connections to the raid, including accounts, shipments, and personnel who could implicate them. Victoria, already unnerved by the DEA's progress, began dismantling their financial network with ruthless efficiency. Offshore accounts were drained and transferred to safer locations, shell companies were dissolved, and any loose ends were cut without hesitation. Her meticulous nature allowed her to move millions of dollars without drawing attention, but the pressure of operating under such intense scrutiny began to take its toll. Meanwhile, Carlos Alvarez, the Cowboys' enforcer, was tasked with eliminating the growing number of threats from rival cartels. The botched deal had exposed weaknesses in their operation, emboldening competitors who sought to claim a piece of Miami's lucrative drug market. Carlos, still reeling from the shootout and the loss of several trusted soldiers, launched a brutal campaign to reclaim their dominance. It was a war fought in the shadows, with bodies turning up in alleys, warehouses, and waterways. The violence reached a fever pitch, further destabilizing an already volatile city. The DEA, led by Special Agent Sarah Collins, capitalized on the turmoil. Using the information gathered from the warehouse raid, Collins began dismantling the Cowboys' supply chain piece by piece. Key smugglers and distributors were arrested, shipments were intercepted, and safe houses were raided. Each victory brought her team closer to Morales, but Collins knew they were running out of time. Morales' wealth and influence meant he could disappear at any moment, slipping through their fingers like so many criminals before him. As the DEA tightened its grip, Collins focused her attention on Victoria Cruz. The financial records recovered from the raid hinted at her pivotal role in Morales' empire, and Collins believed that bringing her in could provide the evidence needed to dismantle the Cowboys for good. Cruz, however, was as elusive as she was intelligent. Her knowledge of law enforcement tactics allowed her to stay one step ahead, covering her tracks and avoiding detection. But cracks were beginning to show. Morales, consumed by paranoia, started questioning the loyalty of those closest to him. His once unshakable trust in Victoria and Carlos began to waver as he became convinced there was a traitor within his ranks. This paranoia led him to make increasingly erratic decisions, alienating even his most loyal allies. Victoria, aware of Morales' growing instability, started contemplating her own survival. She knew that if Morales fell, he would take everyone down with him, including her. Carlos, too, found himself questioning his place in the crumbling empire. His loyalty to Morales had been unwavering, but the endless violence and constant danger were wearing him down. He began to see the futility of their fight, recognizing that the empire they had built was on the verge of collapse. For the first time, Carlos considered the possibility of walking away, though he knew the cost of such a decision could be his life. The turning point came when the DEA uncovered a critical lead. A former associate of the Cowboys, arrested on unrelated charges, offered to cooperate in exchange for immunity. His testimony revealed the location of a safe house where Morales had been hiding, as well as a shipment of cocaine set to arrive in Miami within days. It was the break Collins had been waiting for. She coordinated a massive operation involving federal agents, local police, and even Coast Guard units to intercept the shipment and apprehend Morales. As the operation unfolded, Morales realized he was out of options. The DEA had cut off his supply lines, dismantled his distribution network, and neutralized many of his enforcers. His once loyal inner circle was fractured, with Victoria secretly preparing her escape and Carlos grappling with his disillusionment. Morales decided to make a final stand, rallying the remnants of his forces to protect what little remained of his empire. The raid on the safe house was swift and decisive. DEA agents stormed the compound, encountering fierce resistance from Morales' men. Gunfire echoed through the night as both sides fought desperately, but the outcome was inevitable. Morales was captured, his empire reduced to ashes. Victoria Cruz, who had managed to slip away before the raid, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions about her ultimate fate. Carlos Alvarez, disillusioned and broken, surrendered without a fight. He provided the DEA with valuable information about the Cowboys, confirming much of what they already suspected and filling in the gaps. His testimony, combined with the evidence gathered during the raid, ensured Morales' conviction and marked the end of the Cowboys. As the dust settled, Miami began to recover from the nightmare that had gripped the city for years. The streets were quieter, the violence less frequent, but the scars of the cocaine wars remained. For Collins, the operation was a success, but it came at a cost. The fight against Morales had consumed her life, leaving her with little more than the satisfaction of justice served. Even as Morales faced a lifetime behind bars, questions lingered. Victoria Cruz remained a ghost, her whereabouts unknown. Some believed she had escaped with a fortune, starting a new life far from the chaos of Miami. Others suspected she was simply biding her time, waiting for the right moment to return. In the world of crime, the end was rarely as final as it seemed. The arrest of Javier Morales marked a critical turning point, not only for Miami but for the law enforcement agencies that had spent years unraveling his empire. Morales' capture was celebrated as a victory, yet the work was far from over. The web of corruption he had cultivated left deep scars within Miami's institutions, exposing vulnerabilities that would take years to repair. For the DEA and Agent Sarah Collins, this was not just the end of a case but the beginning of a long and arduous process of cleaning up the remnants of the Cowboys' operation. Morales remained stoic during his trial, his silence unnerving to those who had pursued him. The evidence against him was overwhelming, ledgers detailing his network of bribed officials, intercepted shipments, and testimony from his former associates painted a damning picture of his reign. His once pristine public image crumbled as the court proceedings laid bare the truth about his involvement in the drug trade. Morales, once a respected businessman, was revealed to be the shadowy figure known as El Tigre. The trial became a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the nation. Journalists and spectators crowded the courtroom, eager to witness the downfall of a man who had terrorized Miami for years. Yet, for all the drama, Morales remained composed, refusing to cooperate with prosecutors or acknowledge his crimes. His silence, however, did little to shield him from justice. Morales was convicted on multiple charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy, earning him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. While Morales faced the consequences of his actions, The fallout from the Cowboys' downfall rippled through Miami. The city's police department, tarnished by corruption, underwent sweeping reforms. Officers with ties to the cartel were exposed and removed, though not all could be held accountable due to a lack of concrete evidence. The revelations forced the department to rebuild its reputation, implementing stricter oversight and new protocols to prevent future breaches. The DEA, too, reflected on the case, recognizing the complexity of dismantling such a vast and deeply entrenched network. Agent Sarah Collins, hailed as a hero for her role in bringing down Morales, found herself at a crossroads. The victory was bittersweet, marked by the loss of lives and the realization that the fight against the drug trade was far from over. Miami was only one battleground in a larger war, and Collins knew her work was far from done. Victoria Cruz's disappearance remained one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Her intelligence and resourcefulness had made her a critical player in the Cowboys' success, and her ability to vanish without a trace only added to her mystique. Investigators scoured financial records, searched safe houses, and questioned associates, but Cruz left behind no clues. Some speculated she had fled to South America, using her knowledge of the Cowboys' operations to build a new life. Others believed she had been silenced by Morales' remaining loyalists, who feared she might betray them to save herself. For Carlos Alvarez, the end of the Cowboys brought a mixture of relief and regret. Once a feared enforcer, Alvarez had grown weary of the violence and betrayal that defined his life. His decision to cooperate with authorities marked a significant shift, providing crucial insights into Morales' network. His testimony solidified the case against Morales and helped identify other key players in the operation. Yet, Alvarez's cooperation came at a price. In prison, he lived under constant threat from those who viewed him as a traitor. Even with Morales behind bars and the Cowboys dismantled, the void left by their downfall created new challenges for Miami. Rival cartels scrambled to claim control of the lucrative cocaine trade, leading to a temporary surge in violence. The city's law enforcement, now operating under stricter guidelines and increased scrutiny, struggled to maintain order. It was a grim reminder that while Morales' empire had been destroyed, the demand for drugs and the violence it fueled remained a persistent issue. Miami itself bore the scars of the Cowboys' reign. Entire neighborhoods had been transformed by the drug trade, with families torn apart and communities left to grapple with the aftermath. The glitz and glamour that once defined the city's image were now tinged with the memory of the bloodshed that had occurred behind the scenes. For many, the capture of Morales was not just a story of justice, but a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked greed and corruption. As the years passed, the story of the Cowboys faded from the headlines, replaced by new crises and challenges. Yet, the lessons learned from their rise and fall continued to shape law enforcement strategies and public policy. Miami's officials worked to rebuild trust, focusing on community engagement and transparency to repair the damage caused by years of corruption. Agent Sarah Collins, having achieved one of the most significant victories of her career, eventually moved on to other assignments. Yet the case of the Cowboys stayed with her, a constant reminder of the complexities and sacrifices involved in her work. She often reflected on the individuals who had played a role in the case: Morales, Cruz, Alvarez, and wondered how things might have unfolded differently. Victoria Cruz's name occasionally resurfaced in whispered rumors and unconfirmed sightings, adding an air of mystery to the legacy of the Cowboys. Some believed she had successfully reinvented herself, while others suspected she had merely delayed an inevitable reckoning. For Collins, Cruz represented the one loose end in an otherwise closed case, a figure who embodied the intelligence and ruthlessness that had made the Cowboys so formidable. In the end, the story of the Cowboys became a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. It highlighted the resilience of those who fought to restore justice and the human cost of a war that had claimed countless lives. Miami, forever changed by its role in the cocaine trade, stood as a testament to the city's ability to endure and adapt, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. The legend of the Cowboys served as a stark reminder of the thin line between power and destruction, and the price of allowing greed to dictate the course of history. You've been watching Mystery Minds. Thank you for joining us as we delved into the harrowing story of the Cocaine Cowboys, Miami's drug war. A chilling reminder of the lengths people will go to for power and wealth. This tale of betrayal and violence still echoes in Miami's streets. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest documentaries. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.